I don't know about you, but my soul has been energized and calmed at the same time. It never ceases to amaze me. When I watch a brain doing what the Lord has gifted them with in real time, there's nothing like it. Nothing. It's wonderful. And every one of you has something in your brain that God has gifted you for. And some of you haven't figured it out yet. But the Lord can help you figure that out. And I hope you spend some time figuring it out. Because every brain is different. And if you fail to identify and develop your talents, you will have deprived this world of something that only your brain could give it. And I'm so delighted when I find somebody who is doing what they're gifted at. It's marvelous. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. I told you I was a preacher's kid. We talk a lot about sanctification. I bet you every one of you in this room's got a different definition for sanctification. Well, let me give you mine. Sanctification is the process of learning to live life, exhibiting behaviors that always give you positive outcomes. And that's what we believe that emotional intelligence is all about. So let's fly through some of this information. You can go to my website anytime you want to. You can get these slides and refresh your mind about them. So let's do some brain benders. What's the rule when I'm speaking? Get up and move around anytime you want to. Good. All right, let's go. Top left. The word is earth. What letter is emphasized? Where is that in the word? Middle earth. There you go. Second on the left. This is not rocket science. What are the words? Others is one. What's the other one? Concern. How many concerns are there? One. How many others? 4. Concern for others. There you go. Word in a word. Third on the left. Waiting in the wings. Good. Fourth on the left. The word is? Brain doesn't care if they go forward or backwards. Promises. So, broken promises. Top right. The word is? Performers. Excellent. So, upper echelon performers, high-level performers, top performers, backward performers. Lots of things your brain could come up with. Second on the right. The word is awareness. Good. Self-awareness. Excellent. Aware of everything around you. Third on the right. Climbing on stage. Fourth on the right. What kind? Delayed gratification. Good job. Can you find a fox, a rabbit, and a tiger? Who's got the fox? Who's got the tiger? A few of you. All right. The tiger is an illusion in the branches. Do you see that? There's a couple of eyes. Where's the rabbit? In its mouth. We hope he's not hungry. All right. So here's another working definition. Emotional intelligence involves the ability to know what feels good, what feels bad, and how to get from bad to good in a way that results in positive outcomes. I don't know about you, but I know when I feel bad, and I know when I feel good. And many times I have gone from bad to good, which every brain wants to go to because the brain was designed to feel good. Nothing wrong with that. But I've gone from bad to good in a way that didn't always give me positive outcomes. And I work with large groups of people who have addictive behaviors. That's all an addiction is. It's a behavior that is intended to move you to feel better when you feel bad. But it often happens in a way that doesn't give you positive outcomes. How many of you read Goleman's book when it came out mid-90s on emotional intelligence? Anybody? Yeah, a couple of you did. It was landmark. Nobody had hardly ever heard of the term emotional intelligence back then. They didn't know what it meant. They didn't know how it would affect them. They had no idea that there was a continuum on which you could plot behaviors, and you could say, that behavior is pretty high on the continuum because it moved the person from bad to good. They got positive outcomes versus the ones that are lower that moved them from feeling bad to feeling good but have negative outcomes. And then there's some you can't even plot on here. The way down here, absolutely abysmal. It's interesting as you begin to raise your EQ, and every one of us can do that, you start recognizing behaviors around you that you did not see before. Before my hip went south, I like to drive cars that had 4 on the floor. Little old lady from Pasadena. One of my favorite cars was a 240Z. Do you remember those? Yeah. Okay, well, I had a couple of those. I had a really hot psychedelic green. Go ahead and laugh. It'll be good for you. You'll pump a little serotonin. I remember driving 45 minutes. A friend of mine drove me to the dealership to pick up my first 240Z, and here's this beautiful psychedelic green. I was just feeling so good. I thought, I've got something very unique. I'll be the only woman in the Napa Valley with a 240Z that's this color. Yeah, right. Once I was in it and driving it, I somehow became more aware of the cars around me. And I'd counted 15 by the time I got home, and I was really depressed. So when you become aware of something, it increases your awareness of what's around you, and that can be really, really helpful. So I don't think there's anything new about high EQ behaviors. I think they have been around since our species hit the planet. But what is new is we've got wonderful new research about emotional intelligence and how critically important it is to successful living. So here's the research. It's important because it's half of your success quotient. How successful you are in life is a combination of whatever your IQ is plus whatever your EQ is. So we're born with an intelligent quotient, potential. Few of us ever reach our IQ potential. You can raise your IQ by 5 to 30 points, depending where you start, if you want to work on it. But eventually you would come to a ceiling. No ceiling with EQ. You don't inherit EQ. You learn that. You develop that, but there's no ceiling. The sky's the limit. It's wonderful. So how successful you are in life is IQ plus EQ. But here's the kicker. They don't contribute equally. Your IQ contributes at most about 20% of your success in life. We find in studies of businesses, successful managers don't necessarily have a very high IQ, but they've got a very high EQ. And the less successful managers often have a very high IQ, but a very low EQ. Because EQ is worth 80% of your success in life. So I work on my IQ periodically. You know, I get SAT tests and, go through them and raise my IQ a little, hopefully. But I spend most of my time on EQ because that's going to contribute to my success. So think about when you drive home tonight, and you can go anytime you want, JR. Because I know you got a long way to go. Was it not marvelous he drove 3.5 hours to do a concert for us? Oh, it's just wonderful. Changed my life. I've heard him on record, but I've never seen him play before, and he's absolutely right. Music is meant to be seen as well as heard. So think about, what'd you learn about EQ growing up? Did you learn anything? I didn't. I learned zip. And it's not because my parents didn't love me, but they didn't know anything about EQ, and if you don't know it, you can't teach it. So when we started learning about this, I realized that I could raise mine to significant benefit in my life. So I started working on it, and it's amazing how quickly it goes. It doesn't show up in IQ tests because it's got nothing to do with IQ. However, Dr. Singh, S-I-N-G-H, from India, has created a set of questions, an EQ assessment, that is out being vetted now with the expectation that eventually it will be used by companies to give to prospective employees. So you want to go work for a company, you'll fill out the application for your job, and you'll fill out an EQ assessment. Because organizations are beginning to understand the value of hiring people who have high levels of EQ. And we'll talk about that. And the first takeaway is because there's a huge difference between people whose behaviors cluster at the low end versus people whose behaviors cluster at the high end. So I brought you 2 examples. Here are characteristics of people who routinely exhibit high EQ behavior. Characteristics of people who exhibit low EQ behavior. An average is somewhere in the middle, a little bit of each. Now, if you're an employer, who do you want to hire? It is a slam dunk, duh. You want to hire these people. And I'm telling you, as a preacher's kid, if the members in my dad's congregation had high EQ, my life would have been different, so would his. Because ministers spend a lot of their time dealing with conflicts between members, all of which represent low EQ. And it wears out your minister. Thank you. So, here's a second list. Now, ask another question. If you're looking for somebody for a life partner, who do you want to partner with? You think? So I periodically have people come to my office whining. Do you remember what the definition of whining is? Anger squeezing out through a very small opening. Yes. Well, they're in there squeezing it out. And they're complaining about their partner and they're whining. And I'll listen for a few minutes and then I'll go, stop. Interestingly enough, research suggests we partner with individuals at our level of EQ. Not necessarily do we have the same characteristic, but if we pretty much live at the low end, we're going to partner with somebody at the low end. So I tell them, stop whining about your partner. Start looking at your level of EQ for you. Or they'll come to me and they'll say, I can't find anybody to partner with. And I'll go, stop looking. Start working on your EQ. Because if you raise it, you will be attracted to and attractive to people who have higher levels of EQ. And it's going to make a difference in your relationship. And this is the reason I think it makes a difference. High levels of EQ help to minimize conflict. We're never going to be conflict-free. And you already know that Dr. Brewer and I do not like conflict. We can do it if we have to, but it costs us. High EQ helps to minimize conflict. It's everywhere. We're never going to get rid of it. But if you can minimize it, so much the better. I do this seminar for every new employee that comes to the St. Helena Region hospitals because 2006 statistics, managers spend 18% of their time managing employee conflicts. It's nearly a fifth of what we're paying them to manage employee conflicts. And when you plot those conflicts on the continuum, where do they fall? They're all low. So in a recession, when you cannot really get more business, if you could reduce the amount of time managers spend managing conflict, they could get on with the business that you're paying them to do. And if ministers could get on with the business of helping people understand God's free gift of salvation, instead of spending time trying to resolve conflict, we just might have the latter rain. So it is to everyone's benefit to look at your level of EQ and see if you need to raise it. In my brain's opinion, every one of us does. How many of you are familiar with the Stanford marshmallow experiment? Any of you? A couple of you. Okay. Love this experiment. Let me tell you about it in my own words. Walter decided he wanted to evaluate one characteristic, the ability to delay gratification. He picked 653 4-year-olds. He didn't specify particularly the reason he picked 4-year-olds, but my guess is that's about the age where the reality principle starts to develop. Up until then, kids don't know the difference between pretending and real. And unenlightened parents and teachers often punish them for this. I had an imaginary playmate when I was a little girl. His name was Little John Deerfoot. He was a First Nation little boy. Don't ask me where he came from. But if I could just pull a DVD out, I can just see him as clearly as if he was sitting right on the front pew. Darling little boy. And I would chatter with him and play with him, and one day I made the serious error in judgment of telling my mother about little John Deerfoot. And I got grounded at the age of 4 for a very long time and sent to my room for lying. And she didn't mean to be mean. She didn't understand brain function. But about age 4, you start knowing the difference, and that's when kids will say, well, I have an imaginary playmate, and I know you can't see him, but I can. All right, so here's the deal. He said to these kids, I'm going to give each one of you a marshmallow, and you don't have to do a thing to get it. Yes, hold your hand out, I'll give you a marshmallow. But here's the deal. I got to leave the room for a few minutes. Do you remember when you were 4? How long is 15 or 20 minutes when you're 4? It's a fur piece of time because it's such a small slice of your pie. He said, I don't care whether you eat it or not, but if you wait till I come back to the room and you can show me your marshmallow, guess what? I'll give you 2. So he starts handing out marshmallows. And there's graduate students all around the room, and they're videotaping every sound, every move. And they watch these kids. Some of those kids had the marshmallow crammed in their mouth before he'd finished passing them out. Some of them waited a few seconds, but when the door closed, popped it in. And you watch these kids. Some of them ate, this is 4 years old. Some of them ate their marshmallow, and then they went around and started bullying other kids trying to get their marshmallow from them. Isn't that interesting? Because bullying is learned. So they watched these kids. Some of them appeared to think differently, even at the age of 4. So one little boy went over in the corner, lay down, put his marshmallow down, went sound asleep. Walter came back. He wakes up, grabs this marshmallow, runs over and says, see my marshmallow, give me my other one. One little girl gathered some other little girls around her and said, put your marshmallow behind your back. Well, how smart is that? You still might feel it, but out of sight is sort of out of mind. She said, I'm going to tell you stories. We're all getting marshmallows. And they did. One little boy, couple of little boys, and you know, males have more M cells in their retinas, so they're more motionful. Feel free to get up and move anytime you want to. I watch him. I've never been that motionful in my whole life. They said, let's form an army. So they're hup 1-2ing it all around the room so they can get a marshmallow. My favorite little boy, red hair, freckles, hair standing on end, and he's standing there, and his marshmallow is right here. And he's looking at it, and he's smelling it, and he's licking the corner. And he's just, it's right here. Did he wait? No, he didn't wait. He couldn't stand it. It's too close to his mouth. So, Walter comes back to the room. How many of those 653 kids could show him their marshmallow? More than 52. Give me a fraction. Slightly over 30%. 32 point something could show him their marshmallow. Pretty amazing. 14 years later was the first big evaluation of this longitudinal study, which means it's still going on. You know, you mentioned YouTube. You can go to YouTube and you can watch them doing this very same experiment with little kids, and it's fascinating. Sometimes it's only with 2 or 4, but it's fascinating. So they got the names and addresses of all these kids, and graduate students went out and interviewed them and their parents and their peers and their teachers. Extensive interview to see, is there any difference in their lives now based on whether they got a second marshmallow or not? Nobody knew what they would find. And to me, the results were staggering. There were seriously, statistically significant differences between the 2/3 and the 1/3. And this is what I thought was the most significant. Any child who got a second marshmallow, didn't matter how, fall asleep, march, tell stories, anyone who got a second marshmallow averaged 200 points higher on their SATs. Okay, tell me what it means to you to average 200 points higher. You can usually get your college of choice. What about grants? You don't have to borrow money. You get grants. It's huge. And they averaged 200 points higher. Many of those kids were already taking college courses. Many of them played music, track and field. Some were on the Olympic team. It was staggering how different they were. So after that year 14, this was the conclusion. The quality of self-control at age 4, defined as the capacity to delay gratification as one single skill, is twice as powerful a predictor of later success in life compared to IQ. And now they've got some other markers to bring us up to 80% of how successful you are is all about your EQ. So what is it? Well, researchers have identified 8 behaviors that are commonly seen in people whose behaviors cluster at the high end. So I'm going to quickly go through those, and you can just ask yourself, where am I with this, and maybe do I need to work on that? I will bet you that all of you are really excellent in some of these characteristics, and probably every one of you is abysmal in some of them, because I certainly was. So first, individuals with high EQ tend to exhibit these behaviors, not necessarily 100% of the time, but most of the time. First of all, they're able to identify, accurately label, assess the level of intensity, and express emotions appropriately. That's huge. People with high EQ know, they've taught themselves to recognize when an emotion arises in their brain and body, and they know what it's trying to tell them. Was called down to an office in one of my hospitals the other day. Walk in, and here's this person who is just lost it, throwing things, keyboards, scissors, staplers, books, chair at the wall, and some of them have decorated the wall. And I walked in and I looked at this chaos and I went, "Stop." And the person looked at me and I said, "To me, it looks like I am seeing some angry behaviors." Person goes, "I'm not angry." I said, "What are you?" Well, we're all a little insane. The person goes, "Well, I'm just a little frustrated." Didn't even know the person was angry, unable to identify that, and immediately into a behavior that he's going to regret for a long time. That's where I think all crimes of passion occur. Low EQ. Something happens to upset you, into the behavior, have no idea what emotion has surfaced. 2, they know what the emotion's trying to communicate. Huge. Only reason we've got emotions. And why it is so clear we need to learn what they're supposed to be telling us. Remember, the heart is the seat of emotional intelligence. So, I only talk about the 4 core emotions. I told you this morning that's because those are the emotions that you can see on the face of the fetus during pregnancy, depending on what's happening with the mother. Joy, anger, fear, and sadness. So when joy surfaces, it's a signal, it's information, but life's going pretty well. It may not be flawless, but you have the tools and the support system to deal with the ups and downs of life. When anger arises, it is a signal that your boundaries have been invaded. So, when I'm molested at 11, anger is the appropriate response because my boundaries have been invaded. Fear, that tells you that you're in danger some way, so that you can quickly recognize that and take appropriate action to protect yourself and the people you love. And when sadness surfaces, that's a signal that you've experienced a loss of some type and you're given energy to grieve that and heal it. Now here's the problem in our country. Males are socialized to stop at anger for fear and sadness as well as anger. Women go straight to sadness. So think of this as a staircase: joy, anger, fear, sadness. If you're female and you go to sadness when the appropriate emotion is fear, anger, you've got a long way to climb up. And if you're male and you stay at anger when the appropriate emotion is fear or sadness, you're never going to get those others resolved. Biggest reason for couples breaking up when something really sad happens. She goes to sadness, he stops at anger. So we really need to take a look at this. Able to delay gratification, exhibit good impulse control. All right, that's Walter's research has become characteristic number 3. I was lecturing in Florida Hospital Waterman, teaching this to the managers. When I got back to California, the ER manager called me on the phone and she said, "I have to tell you this story." Said, "I went home, I have 2 children, girl 26, boy 24, girl was home." She said, "I just thought that marshmallow experiment was marvelous. So I told my daughter about it and I said, 'What do you think you kids would have done if you'd been in the original experiment?'" She said, my daughter said, "Well, I know what my brother would have done." And the ER manager said, I jumped to the conclusion that he would have eaten it. But I remembered you said jumping to conclusions was low EQ, so I kept my mouth shut. And I said to her, "Well, what do you think he would have done?" She goes, "Mom, he would have gotten the second marshmallow." She said, "I was so stunned I had to sit down." I said to my daughter, "What makes you think he would have gotten the marshmallow?" She said, "Well, Mommy turns everything into a rule. You told him, I will wash any of your dirty clothes that are in the hamper in the garage, and his dirty clothes are always in the hamper in the garage, so you always wash his clothes." I think he would have just said the rule is, wait to get a second one, and he would have waited. ER manager said to her daughter, "Well, what would you have done?" And I loved her answer. She said, "Well, Walter didn't say you couldn't taste it." She said, I think I'd have nibbled off the bottom corner, and I would have made a decision. Is this so good I'm going to put the energy out to wait to get a second one, or is one enough? And the ER manager said, do you think a 4-year-old is capable of that? And I said, yes, I do. Remember, 2 to 3 years difference in development? So he didn't have 653 4-year-olds. He had 653 kids whose development ranged from, what, 2.5 to 5.5? So yeah, I think a kid could have been capable of that. Able to articulate the difference between recognizing and identifying an emotion and deciding whether you want to take any immediate action, and that's huge. Sometimes you do want to take immediate action. Sometimes you just get the information and you say, next time this comes up, I'll make a different choice. But you don't necessarily do something active at the moment. Listen, read and interpret social cues, and are able to understand the perspective of others. EQ is not about agreement. Get it? It's about knowing your own opinion, being able to listen to the opinion of others. You might agree to disagree. You might tweak your opinion. You might not. You might have to come to a common conclusion. You can do that. But every brain is different, and it's not about agreeing. Exhibit effective verbal and nonverbal skills along with empathy and compassion. That's what I love about music. I think it puts us in touch with empathy and compassion, which is absolutely a Christ-like characteristic. But you still need to get the job done. And I watch parents who are very empathetic, they can't get the job done. Kid starts whining, wants to stay up till midnight watching something on TV. Parents know if you let the kids stay up, they're going to have a horrible week at school. They can't get the job done. They let them stay up and they have a horrible week at school. I saw this the other day in one of my hospitals, I tell you. I have such an interesting job. I was on a med-surg floor, walking down the hall, and I saw this sweet young thing come out of a room. I'm telling you, either my eyes are getting older or the student nurses are getting younger. But she came out with a tray on which there was a syringe with 3 inches of white stuff in the barrel. Okay, I'm an old public health nurse, and I'm looking at that, and I'm going, penicillin, 300 units of penicillin. I'll bet that's what it is. Wonder what she's coming out with this. Maybe the patient wasn't in the room. Because if she'd given the shot in today's world, would she be coming out with a syringe? No. Where would the syringe have gone? In the sharps container in the room. Good. So I went up to her and introduced myself and said, I notice you're coming out with a loaded syringe. What's in it? She says, 300 units of penicillin. And I thought so. I said, what's the reason you're coming out? Well, she says, I went in and the patient's pretty much of a hunk. I said, okay, your point would be? She goes, well, I told him that I had his penicillin shot, and he pulled the covers right up to his chin and said, this is going to hurt. I don't want it. And I said, yeah, I know it's going to hurt. Okay, so she said, I came out. I said, that's not getting the job done. She said, well, what would you have done? And I said, well, let's go in and talk to the hunk. So we walk in, and, if his body was anything like his face, he's probably pretty much of a hunk. I tell Pat, I'm not so far over the hill, I can't recognize a hunk. So I says to him, well, your nurse tells me that you refused to take the penicillin injection. He goes, well, I didn't actually refuse. I just said it would hurt and I didn't want it. She took that as a refusal. Okay, out in the hall, this is what she told me. She said, he's in the hospital the 3rd time in 2 years for a horrible case of gonorrhea. So any of you don't know what gonorrhea is, ask some older person. They could help you with that. They could define it for you. So I said to him, I understand this is your 3rd hospitalization in 2 years for a gonorrhea infection. He goes, yeah. I said, well, before we talk about the penicillin, do we need to talk about how you get gonorrhea? kind of looks at me, and I said, because, 3 times in 2 years is not probably the brightest thing you could have ever done. And if you keep this up, you're going to get all this inflammation and scarring, and pretty soon you won't even be able to engage in the behaviors that probably got you the gonorrhea to start with. Kind of rolls his eyes, and he goes, no, ma'am, I know how you get it. I said, okay, fine. As long as you know how you get it, your choice. Let's talk about penicillin. So we talked about needs to stop the inflammation and stuff. And he goes, all right, I'll take it. I said, all right, roll over. Well, I found out later, this was her very first injection in a real patient outside of sticking a syringe in an orange. Okay, I started the first VD clinic in Napa County. Gave a lot of 3 million units of penicillin. I prided myself, really. Look at the outer quadrant of the person's posterior. Mentally put a dart circle on there. And then you just take this and you whack it in like you're throwing darts. And you go right up to the hilt, and it hurts a whole lot less. And I got so good at it. Once in a while, somebody would say, when are you going to do it? And I go, I'm already done. All right, this is how she gave the shot. If she'd tried to make him pay, she couldn't have found a better way. I don't know if it's going to make any difference on his behavior, but I was standing there cringing. Able to manage own moods and feelings effectively. A mood is simply a feeling that you choose to hang on to for a long time. There's something you can do about that. And 8, this is where I started. Able to handle relationships effectively, minimizing any tendency to take things personally, to jump to conclusions, or to overreact. All examples of low EQ. So I said, Arlene, when's the last time you jumped to conclusions, took anything personally, or overreacted? And then I pulled that DVD up in my brain, and I watched what set things up, and I saw where my behavior starts going south. Back up the DVD, retape it, seeing myself behave the way I want to behave. And it's amazing how quickly that'll go. You'll just develop those skills. Few myths, and then I brought you some of the questions from Dr. Singh's assessment, so you can see what he's developing, because I think they're really fun. EQ has nothing to do with being nice. I personally, nice is a trigger word for me. I have no desire to be nice. You won't catch me being nice. I'm never nice. Nice is what women are socialized to do, to fall into line with whatever anybody wants them to do, whether it works for their brain or not. No desire to be nice. I do want to be always graciously functional. Big difference. I'd like to tell you the EQ is higher in women because I have a female brain, but it doesn't appear to be. No gender difference. It does not mean giving free rein to your feelings. It's fortunately not genetically fixed, and you can start raising it anytime you want to. So because it doesn't show up in IQ tests, Dr. Singh decided he needed to develop this assessment, so here we go. I brought 6 or 7 of these for you. He sets it up with a situation, gives you 4 options, asks you to pick which one represents highest EQ, and then he talks about victim and offender behaviors. So here's the first one. When your idea is rejected, which of these 4 options represents highest EQ? Absolutely, that's what he says. He says you might decide, if you analyze it, that it wasn't a defeat. You knew a lot more about the topic than they did, and therefore it didn't make sense to them. Or you didn't know as much about it as they did, and you can learn. Or you didn't put it across in a way that people could get, But you need to analyze it or you'll keep doing the same thing. He says that 1 and 3 are victim behaviors. If there's nothing you can do about it, that's a victim behavior. If you're waiting for the opportunity to beat the stuffing out of them, that's an offender behavior and isn't going to be helpful. Explain your current life in one sentence. Which option is highest EQ? Two. But look at the way he worded it. A contented person who has what could make you happy. Research shows that the majority of people have everything they need to be happy. Not necessarily everything they want, but everything they need to be happy, but they don't choose to be happy. He says that 1 and 3 are victim behaviors. 4 is an offender behavior, because if you really believe that you deserve better, but someone is supposed to give it to you, and they don't, what will you usually end up doing? Trying to take it from somebody, exactly. When a hearing impaired person in your group misunderstands a phrase, what do? Which is highest EQ? I picked 3. Dr. Singh did not agree with me.
4.
He says 4. He says that, anybody can say, let me repeat that because I'm not sure you heard it. But unless you role model something, you really haven't taught the group that everybody needs to speak up a little bit more clearly. He says if you just do 3, it's like handing a person a fish for dinner. But if you do 4, you're teaching them to fish, which was an interesting concept for me and probably a little bit reflects I lean toward introversion. I have no problem saying, let me repeat that for you because I don't think you heard it. But where do I go from there? And immediately my mind went to, so what am I going to say? Come on, you guys, look at the guy here in the orange shirt. Obviously, he's deaf as a post. So let's try to speak up. I'm sure I could find a gracious way to do it, but I didn't think of it at the moment. When you hear from a third party that someone made a negative comment about you or a friend of yours, what's highest EQ? 1 is definitely not what Singh said. He says 3. He says spend just a short amount of time saying to yourself, if this ever comes up in conversation, be ready to just make a calm statement and let it go. And he says, here's the deal. 85% of the time it won't come up unless you bring it up. Because, yesterday's news is yesterday's news. But be ready to just say something calmly and then let it go. And that's very helpful. 1 and 4 are victim positions. And 2 is an offender position. When newcomers with different opinions attend your group, which is highest EQ? He says 3, but haven't every one of us in this room experienced some of the other things? Absolutely. When classmates comment you're not smart because you don't know the lingo, what do? Singh says 4. He says that 1 and 3 are victim behaviors. If you transfer to another course and you need this one, you're only hurting yourself. It's a little bit like forgiveness. You don't forgive, it's no skin off their nose, it's skin off yours. And this is a free country last time we checked, so telling them to keep their opinions to themselves is none of your business. Now, the last one. I was presenting this to a freshman class at a university. Got to the 7th question, the last one I brought, and they couldn't do it. And I felt myself starting to get irritated because they weren't getting to picking an option. And I took stock of my irritation, which is a piece of anger, and I thought, where's that coming from? And I realized that I had forgotten this was a freshman class. And they're ranging in age from 17 usually to 20 or so, few older ones. But their brains aren't done yet. Their corpus callosum isn't even paved. Forget the prefrontal. And I have to constantly remind myself when I meet people and they're bigger than I am and they look all grown up, that's their body. Their brain may not be anywhere near that. So this was the question. After involuntary transfer to a project with a new boss in a remote area, albeit with a pay hike and promotion possibilities, what do you do? Okay, Hunk in the back stands up. He goes, Dr. Taylor, where's the remote area? I said, this is a question. Make it anywhere you want. And he goes, well, I need to know where the remote area is before I can answer the questions. And I go, actually, you can answer the questions if you choose to. Somebody else stands up and says, are you married or single? I said, are you asking me or are you talking about the question? They said, well, if you're married, you don't want to go to a remote area. And I go, the reason would be, well, you'd have to leave your partner at home. I said, does that say that anywhere? You've jumped to a conclusion that is not part of the data. Oh. Somebody else said, well, how much is the pay hike? I don't know. It's more than you're getting now. So it could be a win-win any way you look at it. You're married. They go with you. You got a pay hike. You're married. They can't go with you. Well, you got a pay hike. You can visit. You're married. You're not happy. You get paid to take a break. I mean, come on, it's however you spin it. They couldn't even get to the options. So here's the emotion staircase: joy, anger, fear, and sadness. People who get involved in addictive behaviors are trying to straight line euphoria. The brain was never designed to live at euphoria. It's, you're 100 and you can actually get 100 candles on the cake. That's going to be euphoric for me. Apathy is not an emotion, but people who don't know how to climb this staircase often end up with a whole bunch of unresolved emotion. They go into apathy, immobile. Nobody tries to kill themselves at apathy. They don't have enough energy. But you just start getting them to heal, and they start up this staircase. Now you have got to watch them because they're still in pain. And for many, suicide is a way to stop the pain. But if you don't really help them, this is where they start about getting enough energy to try to kill themselves. So you can go to my website and learn a lot more about that if you want. So there's a little bit about the current work of emotional intelligence. I think it's fabulous. I think it describes the kind of Christians that God wants to role model his love. And it's a practical way for us to start looking at everyday living and comparing our typical behaviors with what researchers say represent the kind of behaviors that will usually give you positive outcomes. All right, let's take a little break and we'll finish up with the brain and laughter. Please get up and move around.